And here we are, Monday night, Untold Radio Network with Pine Island Research. I appreciate you guys showing up in chat. Live viewers are flying in the door. We got Jen, we got Donald, Mr. Lee's here. Appreciate all of you. Faster Man, My Eyes. Going to quickly go through a few of them. Joe's here. Hey, Joe, Howling Underdog Films. Uncle Bones. Appreciate you guys coming in. It's going to be a fun show tonight. We've got James Lady here with the Michigan Aboriginal Project. I think you guys are going to enjoy this guest. A lot of interesting discussion we're going to have. As always, you can post your comments in all caps if you've got questions that you'd like to ask James or myself. I'd love to get them on screen and feature them. Also, if you have thoughts and opinions on some of the subject that we're talking about, feel free to put them in the comments of the video. So a lot of times people will watch the show, well, most of the time actually, people watch the show after the live broadcast and oftentimes won't be watching the live chat as they watch the show. So if they're in comments, people will always see them. And I appreciate that interaction. It's been a busy week here. Busy week at Pine Island Research. Been working on a lot of different things, getting ready for some different stuff. About a month, I'm going to be traveling up to Manitoba, checking out the island where I had my first encounter. Then also, I believe it's the weekend of October 8th. Me and Doug will be at the Minnesota Bigfoot Conference in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. That'll be fun. A lot of interesting folks will be there. Probably get some footage while we're there. Maybe even pop on and do a little live broadcast. That'd be fun from the booth that we have there. Let's see. What else do we want to tell you about? I know at untoldradioam.com, you can go there and on our homepage, if you've had an encounter and you want to share it with us, tell us about it. You click on the button and it starts recording. And whether you're on your phone, iPad, or you got a mic headset on your computer, you can tell us a little bit about your encounter. If you'd like us to include you on one of the programs, you can say what program. If you're familiar with my show, you can say, hey, this is for Jeff at Pine Island Research. Wanted to tell you about an encounter that I had. And leave us the recording of a little bit about it. I'd love to hear it. And two, I'd love to talk to you further about it then. See if you'd want to come on the show and talk about it. So pretty cool resource. Even if you've had other experiences with the paranormal, you could share that on there, because on Untold Radio, we've got some different shows that are out there. I mean, we've got a couple shows that really primarily focus on the Bigfoot Sasquatch mystery, but also we have some shows that deal with other areas of the paranormal, whether it's hauntings, ghosts, Mysterious Library talks about different iconic books in the community that basically it's like a book club almost. Like they'll tell you what book they're going to be looking at next week. A lot of times they'll get the author on. Pretty cool show. But Mysterious Library is just one of them. And we've got so many great shows and great guests talking about different subjects. So you're welcome to utilize that feature of sharing your encounter to tell us about, maybe you saw something in the sky that you can't explain, or you've had an experience with a ghost or something growing up. We'd love to hear about it. My show primarily focuses on the tech tools and tactics of research in the Sasquatch community. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in our guest tonight. Hey, James, how are you?
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you here. So this is James Lady. You've got a pretty cool thing going on out in Michigan, the Michigan Aboriginal Project. Why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about that? Like, how long has that been a thing, and how did it come about?
Well, if this were 6 years ago, and you told me we'd be having this conversation on this subject, I'd say you're nuts. I know I'm not alone in that. It's just one of those interesting roads traveled. Um, but in 2016, I learned that the phenomenon was quite real in my research for a trip to the Boundary Waters. Found everything I needed, and it was the first time I used YouTube as a research utility. And finally clicked on the bait on suggested videos that came up on the side. And as I've always, since a boy, I've been interested in the Sasquatch phenomenon, and thought if they were real, I wanted to see one. And clicked on that one video, and I went down the rabbit hole, and the rest is history. It eventually, after a couple of years, developed into an audio recording project. And that was the time I realized that, based on the recordings that I was getting from the woods, that they were in fact a people. I used to have a channel called Michigan Sasquatch. It is now Michigan Aboriginal Project, to I think to elevate the bar of discussion. And with the audio that I've had a lot of fun collecting in the woods, I think we're ready to have those discussions, that they are a really sophisticated species of people, quite honestly. So anyway, I got addicted to it, and that was a long road. Almost cost me some relationships, and probably still has some remnant effects of distance with some of those that I love most. But it's been a worthwhile endeavor, because this world is full of amazing mysteries, and the Sasquatch phenomenon is just simply one of them.
Sure.
So went down the road and met a lot of people, and I could boast names of people in the community. I won't waste the audience's time on that, but it's been a hell of a ride, and I've learned a lot, and have tested my mettle as a young man. So
nice.
Yeah.
So when you first kind of developed the interest, I know you had mentioned with me a little bit about how you were planning a trip up into the Boundary Waters, an area that I've got a lot of experience in, and I loved hearing you share that. I want you to share it with everybody else about kind of for a lot of people, that the Boundary Waters is a very long border between the U.S. and Canada. That is a stretch of waterways that are navigable by canoe or kayak or any non-motorized vessel. That has some primitive campsites that are kind of pre-designated throughout the thing, but we're talking 1,400 miles of mapped out canoe trails, so to speak, that basically link about 600 to 700 lakes and waterways together. So pretty out there. I mean, it's all surrounded with some of the thickest forests you're going to find on the planet. So you were researching on a trip to the Boundary Waters, correct?
Yeah, and I got caught up in the whole Bigfoot thing, just tickling my boyhood curiosity about this phenomenon. Decided I wanted to go down that path and actually try to see one.
Wow. Yeah, that's how old were you?
Well, this is just 6 years ago.
Not too long ago.
Yeah, it was 2016. It was the spring of 2016. I thought the world had gone mad, and no matter what side of the aisle you wish to hail from politically,
yeah,
I think the other side's nuts.
I think a lot of people were pushing themselves out into the woods at that point, just for a break.
And Bigfoot's the only thing that made sense to me, I'm telling you. Much to the chagrin of my wife and my family and all that, because I kind of wear my heart on my sleeve, and I was really enthusiastic about the reality that this species exists, and I simply wanted to learn more about it, and here we are now. I've had multiple encounters since then. I've had things in the past that have since been explained based on what I've learned about this phenomenon. Just this past May 12th, I had one outside my tent, just standing there in the middle of the night.
And so for people who are listening, I mean, and this is the thing I always have to remind myself that, people who listen to the show or in chat, they hail from all over. Some are in the big city, some are, out in the woods, live out in the woods, and so, but when you say, in 6 years, you've had several encounters, I mean, we're not just talking about on the side of the road. You have to place yourself out there in these scenarios to where maybe you're target rich. You have to create a target rich environment, so to speak, that isn't just standing on the edge of the parking lot looking at some trees at Walmart.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And you have to be aware of their presence and the things they do. You have to have some little insight as to their behavior. I've seen them at midnight. The only by chance, most of my encounters happen outside of my campsite in northern Lower Michigan. I had an encounter with 3 subjects, and I was with both my daughters and one of their friends up in the UP, and that was terrifying. But benign. Looking back, 2020, it was benign. But when you run into a subject in the woods, big eyes, really wide set, and it's the first time I'd ever seen red eyes, and I called the girls back, and at that time we're trying to decipher what it was. Then it moves very imperceptibly to the left and then to the right, and over maybe 10 seconds it was almost imperceptible. And as a matter of fact, I had to ask my older daughter, did that just move? But by the time it got back, another eye appeared to its right, to the left by our perspective, and a third eye revealed itself with the passing. The eye never moved, but there was a passing of leaves. I saw the silhouette of leaves move to reveal that one eye. So one eye revealed itself here, another off to the right, and the original set over here. So there are 3 subjects there. It was one of those moments where I had to be as calm as I could. I told the girls, do not run, stay with me, and let's go back to the car. I think that the initial subject that moved this way and then back was telling us to go. I think just by turning its head subtly in that direction and back. That's my interpretation looking back. But at the time, it was terrifying. It was the first time I'd ever seen red eyeshine in the woods, ever. I've seen a lot. I've been in the woods since I was a boy. I've seen the yellow-green stuff, and that's about it. But this red eye's bad. At that time, at that stage of the game, everything I learned was red eyes are bad, and that just underscored the terrifying nature of that. The girls are still freaked out about that, and Elizabeth, who grew up in the UP, had never had an experience like that. She's still trying to wrap her heads around it. So there's a video reflecting that on my YouTube channel, and essentially that channel is dedicated to it, documenting my entire journey. And I'm glad, so I'm grateful for where it's taken me, despite the social risks, etc. By just choosing to go down this path. I've been able to produce some things and learn a bit about my quarry, if you will. And so I can go in and easy ingress, bug some structures, go on about my business, and pick up recorders 2 or 3 days later and see what I find. What I found are actually volumes of vocalizations that prove to me that this species is very real, and that there are, in fact, in my personal opinion, a people. I mean, they speak. They say things like FFFim, SFatif, Kapikaswa, Otikapika hut. These are singular expressions that I've picked off some voice activated recordings. And I have multiple other expressions like Ochichichuha and Hejilawa that I've gotten from my personal encounter with that of October 19th, that was October 21st, 2019.
Yeah, and I've heard some of those recordings, and we're going to play a few of them here a little bit later on in the show. I'm excited for people to hear it. I'm a pretty strong subscriber to the idea that in most cases when they encounter a human, that they just want you to leave, and that they probably utilize system of escalation, so to speak, to get you to leave. They might start with something simple like a far off sound or breaking a branch, or trying to get you to feel uncomfortable enough to maybe just turn around and walk away. I think that just keeps ramping up slightly until maybe if you might not even be intentionally ignoring these things. Maybe you're just oblivious to them, and all of a sudden they feel they now need to show themselves, or they need to vocalize in a way that isn't going to be interpreted as friendly, so to speak. So, when you, and I also think that as humans, we can usually gauge each other's intent visually. I don't know if people really put a lot of thought into that, but I mean, when I see you walking up to me from a distance, I can usually tell if you're happy or if you're sad or if you're upset or frustrated, or are you making eye contact with me, or what is your intention, friendly or foe, things like that. We visually determine so many things from each other just from a distance. And perhaps I think that we'd be pretty naive to not think they're capable of doing the same. And so I'm curious when, you mentioned like red eye shine, you hear a lot of people talking about amber eye shine, or even yellowish green eye shine. And then there's red eye shine. Do you think that eye shine is something that could change with their demeanor or their intent, or is it something that's consistent?
Biologically, I don't know. I've seen squid snorkeling off St. Lucia, the little pod that change color at the exact same time. And it was like from fluorescent to almost translucent. It was really, really bizarre. Beautiful. It's just such a beautiful phenomenon. So I think there are biological phenomenons that we don't fully understand. My understanding about eyeshine or tapetum lucidum is it's dependent on nutrition. You have a high zinc intake, you're going to have more red eyes. I don't know the full spectrum, but I think it's more, biology is it's what, chemical, electrical, it's all that. I don't know if they can do that. We weren't a threat to anybody, and if they were wishing to project fear within us, they did a good job at that.
And they were certainly capable of expressing more of a threat than they did simply.
I went back later on, and it appears that they were below a little berm off the trail. So anyway,
the reason why I asked that is, when they first see you, I often say that I think that their weakest link in their armor, chink in their armor, is probably their own curiosity. So I think oftentimes when they see a human at a distance where they feel that they are concealed and they aren't detectable, that they will entertain their curiosity. They'll watch. They'll put their head behind a tree and then peek out and look again. And the longer they peek out, or, the more reveal they may present to themselves, may be running parallel to their level of curiosity, so to speak. And then when they get to a point where it's like, okay, he's close enough, or okay, I want him to leave, their own intent changes. I mean, they aren't just entertained and curious about you. All of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm uncomfortable. I want him to go. And if they were capable of changing the color of eyeshine, I would think that intent difference, neither of them are dangerous. Them wanting you to leave doesn't present, they aren't really presenting a threat to you. And them being curious obviously isn't a threat to you, but they're two different intents that they're displaying at that point. And so that's interesting. I know there's people that are going to hear this discussion and say, well, changing eyeshine. Come on. Listen, as a researcher who believes I'm looking at a flesh and blood creature, I cannot discount, I can't refute something that I don't have evidence that I have grounds to refute it. So the idea that they could be capable of it, I'm not saying they are. I'm not factually stating they could do that. It's just I don't possess the evidence that they couldn't. So I'm okay discussing it, and if we aren't okay discussing things like that we can't prove either way, I don't know how we advance the science, So that's why I asked it. When you said the eyeshine red, I've always heard red is not a good thing.
Yeah.
I've heard that too, but it does make me curious. I've heard accounts where they describe it as yellow eyeshine. I've heard accounts where it's red eyeshine, and I've often wondered, could their mood, so to speak, or intent, is that a way of them expressing that? And is there a biological explanation of how they could? And like you've done, you've presented some obvious things in nature that have the ability to change a color or go translucent. And so I don't think there's any evidence that refutes they could,
Right. Things I've witnessed both underwater and above are pretty amazing. And the whole Sasquatch phenomenon, having recorded 10 minutes surrounding my second to last encounter at this point, I didn't hear most of what was going on. I did not hear most of what was revealed on the audio on those 10 minutes that I published. I heard 20, 30 seconds of it. And at times it was unbearable to hear. Either side of that, there were moments when I was detecting some like percussions in the wind. And I have a theory that they have what I call harmonic resonance, an ability to speak within the din of the rain or the wind that is, different enough for them to detect it themselves, but just off our range. We're just not aware of it. We can't decipher it, although we can sense it at times a little bit. This harmonic resonant. There are a couple of videos. One, I think I called it harmonic resonant speech or some harmonic speech, I think, on it's been done a couple of years ago, but it samples a piece of raw audio footage where I just detected something, and I filter it to the point where it's not over filtered. It's filtered to a point where you can make out what it's saying. It's weird stuff.
Well, again, and I'm just reading chat. I oftentimes feel like people want to hear what you're not saying rather than hear what you say. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure that I stated pretty clearly that I'm not saying that they can do something. I'm just saying that if I don't have evidence that they can't, I'd entertain it. So, not saying that they can change the color of their eyes, Donald, or anybody else who's asking about it.
But even this phenomenon of in eyewitness accounts of these subjects dissipating, like just disappearing before people. Even Davy Crockett wrote to his brother-in-law about having had that very experience, as if this subject, after he warned him not to carry on with the campaign at the Alamo, which I think Davy Crockett and the rest of them should have listened to, they would have lived. It's like Davy described, this subject disappearing like the mist off a frog pond, the morning mist off a frog pond, something like that. But there are all sorts of phenomenons out there that are very natural in nature, that are so unnatural to us because we've been, we haven't been exposed to them all our lives. We've been conditioned to believe that they don't exist. If the current day's science, which is next year's archaic way of thinking.
Jen says, warning red, curious, amber, calm, green. Wouldn't that be something? What would really be something is women could do this. That'd be helpful for us men. You come home, you see the red eyes, go out in the garage, find something to tinker with for a while.
Yeah, I think the mood ring. Remember the mood rings? They were
Yeah.
designed by had to be designed by a guy to determine his mate's disposition.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh,
that would be
man.
something. And if if we could ever prove that to be true or disprove it,
Well, I like having conversations that focus on the general assumption that we're chasing something that's flesh and blood. Now,
yeah,
I've often said I think orbs are probably a real phenomena. There's a mystery there. I mean, there's enough people seeing them that I don't think it's always just dust particles or reflections or things like that. I think that other areas of the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, they're likely real.
yeah.
I mean, I've heard enough accounts, just like I've heard enough Bigfoot accounts, including having an encounter myself, that I know I can take it to the bank. In my experience, that Bigfoot is real. Everything else, I have to look at and say, convince me, And when I do that, I try to look at, we're talking about things that aren't flesh and blood, so to speak. We're talking about there's a supernatural presence in that conversation of how do orbs happen if they are real, or how would a UFO, travel that fast if it's real. I love hearing those conversations. I speak zero factual evidence and taking part of them, but I don't, as a researcher, I don't have the evidence to prove that they aren't real. And I think that's something that people forget about science, or implementing that the scientific approach to something is that you work as hard to find support for a theory as you do to disprove it. And if you aren't, you're not being fair, And so when we talk about things as it pertains to Sasquatch, it's never going to be something we're going to talk about where everybody in chat or everybody that watches this video or hears this podcast is going to say, amen, brother, you're speaking the truth, because there's always going to be people that are going to disagree with certain elements.
Sure.
But
well, it's a species that is nearly impossible to study because you have no control group, right? It's very difficult to get repeated results to reproduce or recreate a specific set of circumstances that, like my last encounter, I changed my camp. I was going to go up from Wednesday through Saturday night. A buddy of mine's mother died. I had to rearrange my schedule, truncate my trip a little bit. So I went up Monday. Totally unpredictable set of events. It was raining. I wouldn't have been there. But it was a perfect storm of events and weather, and came across with one of the most otherworldly audio recordings I've ever heard in my life. There's a channel, 100 Bigfoot Nights. Christina Parker, I think is her name. She has a lot of unique recordings that are similar to some of mine, including some very well enunciated speech by seemingly a juvenile subject. Haven't seen any updates on that channel for years now. That's again 100 Bigfoot Nights. But what I have found, and to somewhat embrace the scientific method unwittingly, quite honestly, is that when I find the hypothesis is this, that these creations, the Sasquatch, make stick structures in the woods. Not just, and most of the stick structures I see on YouTube where people are claiming these are stick structures are just accidents of weather, in my personal opinion.
Or there's plenty that are man-made too.
Could be, but I'm looking for wigwams, teepees, and sometimes high concentrations of them. I've gotten some of the best recordings from them, and repeatedly over the past 3.5 years, going on 4 years, I have repeatedly gotten otherworldly, weird ass vocalizations, ranging from speech, grunts, this harmonic resonant kind of stuff to chanting. I've gotten chanting. I don't know if you've heard that video or not. Recently, it was last month in Lower Michigan, I got conventional speech, but by what seems to be two separate female subjects. So
when you say that
within
you get these recordings, James, by leaving, you're talking about audio recording. You're leaving
Yes,
an
correct.
audio recorder
Yeah.
within one of these structures
Yeah,
and
something
coming
like
back
that.
later to find it.
Exactly. And a single AAA battery will give me 2 or 3 days, 2 or 3 nights of recording.
Mhm.
So that's all I do. I go on a hike and look for these structures, rubbernecking the whole way. And I found 2 new ones here in Lower Michigan last month. And
Tell us about the areas a little bit that you find them in. I mean, are fairly remote or?
No, actually, they're coincidental with the greenways, rails to trails systems, are public parks within suburbs, often Southfield. What's the other one? Westland. There are quite a few around here. I once was driving Cliff Bergman to the airport after we did a joint. I think it was the first time I aired some of my earlier audio, and he did a presentation locally for a bunch of friends. It was a lot of fun. But he said that had the series gone on another season, they were going to look into the urban Sasquatch phenomenon, and Detroit was number 1 on their list. And Detroit has a system of three major river systems. There's the Clinton River, the Huron River, and the Rouge River. And up and down these rivers that's what I call the Sasquatch highways. And if you look in sometimes public parks, if it's an offshoot of one of these rivers, if there's a greenway, like in Southfield, this is public knowledge, it's published on my channel. Southfield, there's Bowervick Woods Park, and it's and several acres of freestanding hardwood deciduous trees, and within this are several structures that I look for: teepees, wigwams, lean-tos, that kind of stuff. And if I see signs of recent activity, I will drop a recorder to verify their presence. And I've done that successfully in Ann Arbor, Southfield. My favorite places are up north, of course. The greatest concentration of these wigwams, teepees, and lean-tos literally looks like a village, is up in the UP. And I was clued into it by a waitress up there who told me she saw a Sasquatch crossing the road. And I went there and found this high concentration of these structures, and got, on one night, August 11th, 2020, got 2 of the most significant recordings I've ever gotten. They're all significant, if you ask me, and there's so much that I really even haven't published. But they're out there, the structures are there, and I believe they commune there, and they get together, they talk a lot, but not always easily detectable. We know they click and cluck, do that kind of thing.
Sure.
And sometimes it's very subtle. Sometimes you have to listen for this harmonic resonant disturbance in the general din of the night. And then when you start to tweak that a little bit, you're actually deciphering speech in dialogue with the subject.
Well, and you've got a little bit of a challenge too, because a lot of times those recordings that you gather in greenway areas, so to speak, the ambient sound that you have. I mean, people who are familiar with our show that I've played, we did a show that just featured Doug's son Blaine Highcheck's recordings that he had gotten at Angleworm Lake up in the Boundary Waters. Now that was so quiet that night that you can just kind of hear the ambiance basically of a million mosquitoes in the air. There's not much there, no wind. So a subject standing 30 yards away from a Zoom audio recorder on a picnic table just going, you could hear it easily. You're dealing with in these greenways a lot of times, like one of the really interesting recordings you have, and we'll play it here in just a moment. At the time, I thought, man, it sounds like you've overdubbed that low bass range kind of ambiance, haunting music that you see on the Bigfoot shows on TV. And I realized that's either a generator like way in the background or a plane or something flying over. And I asked you about it, and you said, there was a prop plane that was flying. It's quite a ways away, but it has that bassy presence in the background as you're hearing that voice. So I want people to understand what you're hearing when James plays these recordings is just raw audio. It's just that there may be a lot going on in the ambient sound that's there, other than what you're hearing.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And that particular location was within the city limits of Ann Arbor. The rivers are their highway systems, and this particular place has the unique feature of both the river and a bisecting railway, and also power lines. So it's like and I know Doug has reflected on this in one of his podcasts I listened to within the past 6 months, that it does, and he's observed the same thing at those junctions, at these intersections of power lines, railways, and rivers and such. That's where I have found it's most common to find a concentration of stick structures in those areas, and it may be because they're region. I believe they're regionally nomadic. I believe that these are just designated places where they meet and commune.
yeah. No, I agree. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, you're welcome to leave them in all caps, and I'll try to pull them out of the chat and bring them up and talk about them. I do think that you're on track with the idea that structures of any kind, I mean, are often hard to assume that they're placed there by Bigfoot. I mean, we've got so many different things that are playing the possibility, but then we start looking at some things like perhaps they're, again, it's one of those deals where I'm trying to prove that they aren't as much as I am. And I think that some of these structures kind of are intriguing to a point to where they become a form of communication or establish boundaries or things like that. I think there might be something to that. Again, I haven't researched that much. I don't see it often in the Pine Island forest where I do my research or in the Boundary Waters areas, but there is an area that I do see this. And that is in the Red Lake Indian Reservation, which borders the Pine Island Forest. It's north of the Red Lake area, and there is a reservation there. It's a large reservation, all forested. The interesting thing about that is that First Nations people who live on the reservation can get hunting permits that allow them to hunt year-round. And there is no limit to the amount of big game that they can harvest. Therefore, you don't see many deer in those neck of the woods. And we're talking thousands of acres.
Mm-hmm.
And yet when you cross that border into the Pine Island Forest, it's like a preserve. Like all of a sudden, there's all the deer. There's the black bear.
The animals know. They do.
And so I know that sounds weird because people really want to naturally correspond that, to these native areas are so in tune to nature and things. And I think there's a lot to that, but understanding the reality of hunting pressure and what that does to big game, that when I go into the Red Lake Reservation and I put myself way off the grid in those woods, I do see bent live trees, and I do see what seem to be unnatural elements as far as how branches appear to be designed rather than fallen.
Mm-hmm.
And I often wonder if, taking into consideration why there's so much hunting pressure by the locals on that reservation, that maybe there's a need for Sasquatch to feel that it needs to try to present boundaries, like stop here, or they don't get where they weren't at the meeting where the reservation was told, here's where the border is of the reservation, here's where the forest starts. They don't get that. They just notice there's a lot of people that come out here and kill stuff, and there's over here there doesn't seem to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe I don't understand why I don't see that stuff in the Pine Island Forest, and yet literally 10 miles away into the Red Lake Reservation, all of a sudden it starts showing up. So it could have a lot to do with communication and boundaries and maybe trying to establish, like, show me some reverence and
Mhm.
respect, or whatever it's trying to utilize them for. If it is, I'm not saying that those are Sasquatch created,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
if it was, there
It's
might
hard
be
to
something to that,
Yeah, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. What I look for are these kind of things. The subtle stuff I let go because, it could be an accident of
Sure.
wind and whatever, water or whatever. For the audience sake, this is something there we go. Um, I dropped a recorder here in August. This is where I got these female subjects' speech that sounds very, very First Nation like. It sounds like Native American speech. Then there's another one that sounds quite different, unlike any other language that I've ever heard, and it's answered by the melodic clicking, clucking kind of stuff. We can play that in a bit. So the structures that I look for are either this one that I just showed you. This is in the same, what I call a wallow, same area, and they're right next to trails. People think that people make these, and some people may, but when I drop recorders, I'm consistently getting, not all the time, but I'd say 90+% of the time, I'm getting audible vocalizations with cadence. I get well enunciated,
Yeah.
multisyllabic expressions of a tongue that's really unfamiliar to me. And I've
Which
traveled around
isn't an
the world.
indication that they're necessarily in the structure, but they're passing
Around,
within an
correct.
audible distance of it.
Hmm.
So maybe it is a reference point, like when they build something like that, it may be a reference point. Now,
Yeah.
Brown Dwarf says he finds structures on beaches and a lot.
Yes, he
And,
finds
and a lot.
wonderful structures.
So he was wondering, the river system itself, have you seen any correlation between the waterways and where you see
Yeah,
structure?
absolutely. It's up and down I'm always near a river or stream when I'm finding structures of significance. And these are beyond a doubt manipulations of wood in the form of teepees, wigwams, and lean-tos, and other weird manipulations.
Yeah.
There's early in my history, right outside my camp, I found a tree bend, and it was fastened to a stick, which was planted on the wall, but it was fastened together. The tree and the stick were fastened by a piece of bark, and it had to have been manipulated. There was no way it was an accident of nature that these were connected. And it was just, I don't know if they do it out of boredom or if they're arcing somehow the energy of the earth to open up a portal. I have no idea. It's so far beyond me. But when you come by the clearly, obviously manipulated structures, I've come across long, long, skinny trees that are bent back under and stuck under a couple logs. That just doesn't happen naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the, it's called bent. The video I'm referring to earlier with those three-part, the bent tree and the bark and the stick, is called Bent with Fascination on Michigan Aboriginal Project. And fascination is FASTEN, just kind of a play on words. But it was clearly manipulated out there.
Yeah.
So there is something to the tree bends there. To me, they're more difficult to decipher because that was a really esoteric way of connecting some sticks.
Well, and I think there's, we've seen evidence and from different researchers, and listen, I get where some of these researchers, people look at and say, "Oh, that guy's a crazy," or what. But I've seen it from enough different ones that they all can't be kept. They all can't be manipulating this, and that's that when you see a break. That is, a lot of times it is twisted about 180 degrees and broken, which is not natural unless you're talking. I mean, it would be if there somehow was a forest and planted out here in the plains of South Dakota and Kansas and Nebraska. Maybe a tornado circular wind does that. But in most forests, straight line winds will break trees over. And I could find plenty of examples of that and show you and say Bigfoot did it. And somebody would be right to say, you don't know that.
Yep.
But when you start seeing them twisted 180 degrees and bent, now it gets a little interesting as to a natural explanation to that, So there is, I it's that research part of me that looks at it and says, I might see something that I want to discount, right? And say, but I have to look at it and say, is there a plausible explanation that could explain this? And oftentimes we find ourselves, if we're really trying to approach it neutrally, I might not be able to say it's likely that a Sasquatch did it. But a lot of times I find myself saying it's not likely that a human did this.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, to take a 4-inch tree and turn, just splinter it by stretching it 180 degrees in rotation and then bending it over. It's like, that'd be pretty tough.
Wind doesn't do that. Wind's going to have a very decisive, insult, and its result will be finite. It depends on.
So again, it's not something where it's easy to look at and say, "Oh yeah, it was a Sasquatch for sure." But at the same time, I have to be able to be reasonable in how I'm discounting something and say it's highly unlikely that a Sasquatch did that. Well, I have to say how likely it is, then what caused it. And if I can't find plausible explanations for what caused it, now I'm stuck. Now we have to actually entertain, it doesn't seem like there's an obvious answer sometimes. And there are areas in research where we find ourselves stuck there, where what's the obvious answer? And there isn't one that, has a red or a green flag flying at the top of it. So
it's very difficult to tell. And initially I went into it just looking for looking for subtle signs, and mainly stick structures and such. And then I discovered the audio fascination, and that's really what has tickled my brain the most. And it's the gift that keeps on giving, because you can always go out and get more.
So I wanted to say something to those who, and I get why they would. I've got some close friends in research who really don't put a lot of stock into structures just because many of them could be reproduced. And I would say that many of them that you see are probably ones that have been produced by humans, but or by nature, and people want to, for lack of a better word, we'll use Pat's terminology, they want to pour some Bigfoot sauce on it and say it was definitely Sasquatch,
I like that.
Not really utilizing a scientific approach to it. But we had a conversation earlier, me and you, about, and I think it relates to these structures. Now, this is just entertain me here. The whole idea of when people say, well, how come we never find bodies or bones? And, me and you talked about that a bit, about what it would take if their main goal, I think things that we don't really argue about, things we can all agree on, their main goal is to be elusive and be evasive and not be bothered by humans. Their own curiosity may bring them to those boundaries where they look at us, or ends up being encounters. But for the most part, I think they would prefer not to be around us. And in order to live a life like that in a family or a clan or a group of them, there has to be different roles that are played. I mean, I would assume that there's probably an alpha male role. There's several juveniles or different age groups of males. There are mothers and infants, and they have to work as a system in order to be elusive and survive. And there's different roles. There's probably sentries, there's hunters, there's protectors, there's nurturers. Everybody's got a different purpose that they serve, so to speak. And so when it takes a clan to be able to survive, and they depend on each other fulfilling their roles properly, and if they are as closely related to humans in that perspective, and have intellectual thought and things like that, it'd be hard to refute that they have reverence for each other. They value each other. They depend on each other.
No question. Much as we do, we love our young. We love our
Yeah.
parents.
And, I need you to watch my back
Mhm.
while I go do that. If you don't do it and you fall asleep, my safety's at stake. I might run into humans if you aren't watching, And so I think they develop a system of reverence or a notion of reverence and respect for each other, which may just explain why we don't see bodies. Maybe if they do have reverence for each other, they may bury each other. They
I,
may experience the a feeling of grief or
no doubt about it.
when one of theirs passes.
Mhm.
They may dispose of the body in some way so that it can't be discovered, out of respect, not just out of a survival instinct.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, if we could agree that they would maybe hold a system of reverence for each other or a need for each other to operate as a family, then I think we could look at little things like trinkets being woven and being hung somewhere. I think as humans, we're naive enough. You see people doing this all the time in these Facebook groups. Oh, it left this for me. It left that for me. The world doesn't evolve around you. It may have made that for its a young one that's in its clan. It may have made a structure or something significant in reverence to one of its own in its clan.
Mhm.
It may have made something as a way to remind others when you pass by here, make sure whatever. I mean, they don't have metal posts and metal signs to paint. They have other ways they notify each other of things.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea of reverence and need for each other to be elusive may correlate with some of the things that we find that appear to be woven or created or things like that. I don't think it's a far reach to think that could be, so
No,
to speak.
not at all. What got me into the recording project initially was my observation over time, over several weeks, of one particular structure within the oxbow of a river, and it was a teepee structure. And I observed, and there were manipulations. There was a teacup that would move every time I was there. And once the teacup was there at seemingly a place setting, it was pine needles cleared from the ground, sticks arranged in a glyph-like fashion. Don't think it was a glyph. I think it was maybe mimicking utensils. I've seen that very teepee adorned, the entryway around Christmas time, adorned with evergreen over the entrance. And I've found ornaments, probably stolen from the local community and brought into the wallow and to decorate the structures, both the wigwam and the teepee. That's what got me into the recording, and the seeming juvenile activity, that teacup moving all over the place, and manipulation of woods, and brushing, cleaning of the woods floor, just suggested juvenile play. So started dropping recorders. Didn't want to initially, and there was a fellow out east who sent me his, much to his credit, and who started my new addiction, my obsession of recording these stick structures in the woods.
Well, let's hear some of them now. Which one should we play first? The one that kind of has that prop playing sound in the background?
Yeah, if you like. This is one of my most recent recordings for the audience's sake. And
now, you've heard this 1,000 times, so you've kind of deciphered what is being spoken here. And doing some research, you haven't found a native language that correlate. I mean, it really does sound like a Native American language.
Yeah, and it could be. I don't know. I know that I have other expressions where they sound completely animalistic, like Hejilawa and Ochichichuha, things of that nature. This is a female subject within a wallow. It's rare that I've recorded there in the summer, but I was bored and had to go maintain some sanity and go walk in the woods, drop the recorder. This sounds like and there are two female subjects. The other one's speech sounds less Native American. She says something like, Eddie Hop Hoskins, Vos to the east and to the Osva. And what's unique about that expression is that it's immediately followed by melodic clicking and clucking, which we know the Sasquatch are known to do. It's a form of communication, but it's interesting because it's a one vocal modality that's used in response to conventional speech from this subject. And it was either in 9 minutes apart. I don't know if it was before or after. Is this one? I will see if it plays here. Okay. It was in the beginning there. It says, Honey Hawa, I was Shigewanawa. And the drone that you mentioned earlier happens almost immediately after that. Honey Hawa, I was Shigewanawa. Here's the drone of the plane coming.
Yeah, I can hear that.
And right there, Saga, you can hear in the background. Saga, it's difficult. I do have a cleaned up version of that, filtered version that makes it easier to hear. I have not.
I suppose if you pull some of that bass out, you'll get some of that prop wash out of that.
Yeah, that is really disturbing. But in the first half of that clip, you hear clearly a female subject, sounds female. Honey Hawa, I was Shigewanawa. And the other one, this is the Honey Hop Hoskins, Vos to the east and to the Ospa. Listen. So those were the melodic clicking following the conventional speech, which does not sound Native American to me. It could be. I don't know. I'm not certainly no expert.
The first audio that you played in my mind, and the first time I heard it was today, so I haven't had a lot of time to. But the couple of times I've listened to it, it really is similar to just what you would expect a woman's voice to sound like. I mean, it doesn't have that 800-pound creature feel, so to speak, but yet I think of other sounds that people attribute and say they've heard it make, as far as subtle sounds, like just the lip popping and the light whistles and things. It's like, they don't necessarily sound like sounds that you would hear a giant creature making either. So, I mean,
it's imagine is because we really don't know.
Well, I mean,
such a wide range of variable vocal modalities, and actually some things down in southern Michigan that I picked up that I've never recorded in northern Michigan, which makes me wonder if perhaps it might be a different cryptid.
It could be. I mean, I would say that, I mean, just as humans, even you talk to somebody who lives in the swamps of Louisiana, and their accent compared to a woman from New Jersey and a farmer from Fargo, North Dakota, it sounds like three different creatures. They don't even speak in the same language.
Half my family hails from Ashland, Kentucky, and also West Virginia. When they get talking, man, you really got to home in.
And I think to be fair, I mean, let's just say what he's playing for you is audio recordings that he captured. Now, somebody could say, how do you know that's not a woman walking by speaking that we can't say that. We can't say that it's not.
Right.
We're just playing for you the audio that he's captured. And some of it is, I'd really love somebody who could hear that first audio and say, I know what language that is.
I'd love to hear that.
I think that would be amazing, because now we could attribute an origin to either that human that walked by was speaking that language, or if it was a Sasquatch, that there's an origin of where it derived or learned that from,
I have sent both those clips to a linguist, retired linguist, he'll rename nameless, from Wayne State University. And I was put in touch with him through a mutual friend. And I have yet to hear back. I haven't heard, anything negative. I haven't heard anything. Have yet to hear back. I've sent this off to the linguistic anthropology department at Harvard. I never, ever get a response. I do this every once in a while. I don't spend too much time. This is a hobby. I got to keep it in its proper place. But every once in a while, I'll just send it off to someone who should be an authority. But I don't think anybody knows what to do with this stuff. I'm kind of, it's a point of frustration for me.
I would agree. Joe from Western New York Bigfoot had asked, has he ever played it for First Nations people or anybody that said they recognize the origins of it? I
have not, but I'd like to.
Yeah. Well, hopefully somebody hears it. Now, just so everybody knows that these audio recordings are accessible on your
I've published
website,
everything. My YouTube channel is not monetized. I'm putting it out there. I think it's important that for people to realize what's out there. I had no idea any of which I never saw myself having this conversation for the life of me. It's just like one of these things. I'm perpetually curious in my method of identifying structures and consistently getting these vocals, which I'm learning a lot. I haven't even broached. I don't think it's the tip of the iceberg, quite honestly, that where we are right now. There's so much to learn, but I'm just beginning now after 3.5, nearly 4 years of recording, just beginning now to get repeated expressions and more insights into their vocal modalities and vocal expressions. Like the one of these clips that I just played, there's a sort of a honk sound after the speech. I have that same sound 3 years ago, January 6th. I know the date because it was that's the one that starts with snoring and has the maternal, I'm guessing maternal subject, coughing. Sounds completely human. Snoring sounds completely human. Then you have the other stuff mixed in, which is absolutely inhuman, and just something that is, it's not one of us. It may be in the species Homo, but it's not Homo sapiens.
Yeah. So a couple other things I'm just trying to wrap my head around here as far as explanations as to what we're listening to. If it wasn't Sasquatch, it would be when you leave these recorders, they aren't visible. I mean, I would assume you kind of put some leaves, or you kind of somewhat ground camel them in.
And I'll tell you, Jeff, they always find them. So I'm a little lackadaisical about where I'm leaving them.
Well, a Sasquatch might always find them, but my point is if it was dark, or depending on the time that the audio is captured, a couple of humans walking by could explain an audio capture. Just they happen to be walking down that area. Now, for them to correspond with each other in what seems to be either a native language that isn't commonly spoken, and then also in maybe a different dialect in that same clip, or sounds that are in that same clip. Now you start wondering, if somebody wasn't aware of that there, what's the likelihood of that happening? I mean, we really start getting to a point to where, unless it was done by the person who left it there, which it's not a woman's, I mean, it's not your voice. That doesn't sound like. I mean, I'm trying to play the skeptic here, because I know there's people in chat that will. There's people that will watch this that will. The frustrating thing, that place that you're in is the same place I end up in research a lot of times. When we talk about, here's what we found, I'm just going to tell you about it. I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to let you listen to it, whatever. When people say, well, how do you know this? I don't. How can you explain this? I can't. I'm simply sharing with you what I have. And yet
Mhm.
people will always expect that you are supposed to somehow narrate some explanation that helps them wrap their head around it.
Right.
And I don't know how
You
I
can't.
don't know how that burden shifted you by saying, "Look, I'm playing for you what I've heard or what I've
Right, right.
captured," you know?
I know what I believe based on all that I've listened.
Sure.
I've listened to well over 500 hours of nocturnal audio recordings, but the methodology is always the same, except for my encounter audio. Every single audio capture that I've gotten is from these structures.
So
I
Blake
found them
says,
in the.
make sure to play the video James got of the one at night behind the tree.
Oh yeah, that's the. I could send that to you. It's actually on the homepage. Thank you, Blake, for that. It's on the homepage of MichiganAboriginal.com. I
Okay.
have a 2-minute video on my homepage, MichiganAboriginal.com, and it is a subject in the background, and it pivots, and I do a little what do they call it? Scrub analysis of it
It's an
using.
interesting comment Uncle Bones made. It's look, I don't have any data to say that there's no way it could be that. I mean, probably as plausible as anything else, you know.
Yeah, I've wondered that myself because I've gotten some really ghostly. I've recorded ghostly stuff, gremlin-y stuff, fairy-like stuff, angelic speech, like conventional speech, chanting,
Sure.
and it's so broad. And this is both from the Lower and Upper Peninsula. Um, Before I respond to Blake's script and send, I want to play one thing. I was up in the UP in 2020 and spoke to a waitress at a local diner. She said she saw one. I went to where she said she saw one, and I found a high concentration of stick structures. Now, on Michigan Aboriginal Project on YouTube, you can go. There's a video called Vocal Village 2 Recorder Placements, and you will see a segment of that wallow where it's all, a high concentration of really unique structures, and this recording came from one of those structures. It's the second structure that I bugged. I bugged it around 7:20 and left it thereafter. The other recorder was placed maybe, I don't know, 60, 80 feet away. It would have picked up this vocalization if it were after 8 o'clock. So, because that's when it was scheduled to go off. This was captured between 7:20. Right after I left, their eyes were on me. Allow me to play this. It's
Yeah.
only 12 seconds, and listen to the end. You have multisyllabic, these phoneme streams. That's clearly speech. Here goes. So there are at least 2 subjects there. I think maybe 3. It has that clicky stuff going on in the middle of there. You have one in the middle, one subject in the background. Sounds like he's saying Chauncey, like Chauncey, maybe a name. But the one in the foreground is clearly pissed off.
Yeah, you can tell there's an
Yeah.
agitated, but there is contrast to that agitation point. There is at least a second voice, if not a third,
Yeah.
that is making sound that isn't at that level,
Yeah, and you can detect the subjects based on the intensity of the signatures there. So the lighter stuff in the background,
Sure.
you can actually see it if you will see it in a 3D somewhat perspective. And I guess I could play that video that Blake mentioned. This is
Honestly,
the
when
subject
when you were showing that picture and held it up to the camera, your camera focused really well on it. So I'm
good.
thinking you could probably play that on your phone.
Yeah, let me do that.
Just so people know, you can see it at his website, and I'll put that up here.
Yeah, the website's MichiganAboriginal.com. The YouTube channel is Michigan Aboriginal Project. And that just came about simply because, as I learned, they were no longer Sasquatch to me. They were They are a creature of the woods, the people of the woods who speak. Really bizarre. And it's just wonderful. I feel like a kid in the woods again. I grew up on, the Planet of the Apes and Tarzan and all sorts of, action and adventure movies. Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, all those guys were heroes to me. And right now I've kind of grown up to be a big little kid in the woods. And I tell you, I'm having the best time of my life. Okay, here it is. It's a 16-second, and this is a scrub analysis of the subject in the background. So this is a very small part of a larger video, and it's the scrubbing back and forth. But you see an upright hominid structure. There goes from right to left. But you see the contour of the back, the buttocks. You can actually see down to the most of its legs. Right now you're looking at contour of the back and the head. I'll play it one more time.
Yeah, and hold the phone back just a hair.
Okay.
There you go.
So it's a moving subject. The light reveals contours to the body. It does. When you look at it closely, you can spend as much time as you want on YouTube or my channel. But it does show the auricular recess, the ocular recess, and a subject that is clearly avoiding the light that is cast from my flashlight. And that happened. The only reason I knew to do that is to grab my flashlight and the recorder. Was this long stare down. I was going to bed. It was about 9:45. I had my red headlamp on. I went to the side of the camp to spit my toothpaste and looked up, and I'm looking at these two, yellow-green eyes, huge, wide set. And it was a stare down from there. We were there several minutes until eventually it closed its right eye, didn't move its head, didn't turn to make one eye disappear, closed one eye. And within a minute or two after that, I decided to, as nonchalantly as possible, grab my camera and my flashlight. And within the first, 10, 15 seconds, I captured that subject in the background.
How long, I'm just curious if you remember, how long was the one eye closed for before it opened again?
It didn't open again. When it remained closed, that's when I decided to grab my camera and the flashlight. And after that, I didn't see anything. Quite honestly, that footage remained on my camera for 4 months, and until it was February when I finally got to it. I usually camp in late October, so I finally reviewed the footage because I didn't see anything after that. I thought it had gone. I really didn't think I had captured anything on video, but it turns out I did. And there are also some very subtle. What I'm calling the harmonic resonant speech modality. And I'll do a piece on that sometime in the future, amplifying those vocals and showing the audience that, they have that ability to speak with one another, to call out to one another without our ability to hear it, even when they're in close proximity.
Yeah. When people say that they saw a set of eyes and that one of them shuts, I've heard some people say, "Oh, it's like it winked at me." A lot of times, you understand that it's perfectly dark where they're at, and you can't really see. You might be able to tell there's not trees there, but it's hard to tell if my eyes are shining and all of a sudden I got a mosquito flying right in my eye, and I go like that to get it away. From 100 feet away, it's gonna look like I winked at you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I often am asking little questions about how long was it closed for? You say it remained closed. It's almost like it put its head behind something that maybe you didn't see was even there. You know what I mean?
That would have revealed movement, and it didn't. I think it just shut its eye. I believe it was becoming oversensitized to the red light that I had on. That's my guess.
Well, in the military, I spent 6 years in the military. When somebody would fire off a surface trip flare, we would close our dominant shooting eye, and we would watch the perimeter with one eye, so that when the flare went out, You could open up your shooting eye and your vision wouldn't be screwed up.
Yeah,
You could now
yeah.
look through a scope or look through, night vision and not have your vision altered. If it's looking at red and it may close maybe one eye. I mean, I'm not saying this for a fact. I'm saying here's a plausible explanation that could explain it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're trying to preserve their vision quality for when that red light is not there anymore. And now they can open up an eye and they aren't sitting there with their eyes trying to adjust now.
Yeah.
Who knows? It's hard to say.
No, that's just my best guess. And again, I didn't think I captured anything when I engaged the camera until 4 months later when I looked at that. And that there's another story of that. Other people have done analysis and come to the absolute incorrect conclusion on that one. But it's I think my analysis is enough to satisfy anybody. I get it. It's in the background. It's blurry, but that's kind of how you know it's real, right?
Yeah. I am too, Joe. I mean, I'm after the show. I'm going. I didn't do this earlier. I should have done it earlier, but I want to spend some time scrubbing the video to where go to your website, look at where you can back it up, move it forward, back it up, and just look at it enough so that you can really get a sense on a 20-inch computer screen, what.
I'll send you the original, and you can actually enhance it. You can, magnify it on your iPhone, if you will, and scrub it back and forth. You get a similar effect. I ran it through some filters just to give it a little contrast. I got to get to Messenger here. So anyway, and I got that subject at 6 weeks after I started my field work. I did about 6 months of going down the rabbit hole, getting excited, troubling my kids and my wife and all that, and my family. But I tell you, it's been the greatest ride of my life. It really has been.
We were joking a little bit earlier before we went live, we were talking, and your lovely wife came up. She hadn't seen her all day. She came up and gave you a kiss, and you started telling me about when you guys met and were dating, and she realized you had an interest in this sort of thing.
Yeah. It's kind of like a Mack truck hitting her in the head. Because if I put in my dating profile, I was into this, and I wasn't even into it at the time. She told me, she said, if I saw that in your dating, I would never. And she did. She almost let me go, which is understandable.
I told you this story, but I haven't shared this online. And I don't think Doug would mind me sharing it. It's kind of funny. But Doug, at one point before he's with his lovely Yvette. Okay. But there was a point where he owned a fancy restaurant, a really nice restaurant. And it was the host to a lot of big things in that metro area, as far as they'd have like beauty pageants. This was an Italian restaurant, marble bars in it. It was really nice. And so there was always beautiful single women coming into there.
Aww,
and Doug would
rough.
Made it a custom, not just for the women, but for everybody. He'd go out and say, how was your meal tonight? Welcome to the club, things like that. And if a woman said, well, what do you do for a living? He'd say, well, this is my place. But I also, I have an interest in Bigfoot, or I, produced monster. I'm thinking, if you told them that, who says, well, we should go out Friday night,
Nobody. And if she says yes, you got something going on there.
I mean, I think we're insulated in this community. If there's any women in chat, they're like, oh, I'd love to meet a guy who's interested in that. But 99.9% of the women, I think, are like, okay, I didn't sign up for this, really.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we're all strange creations. I grew up with 3 sisters, right? And there's no wonder I still run down to the woods every chance I get. No offense, I love my sisters. They're all awesome, quite honestly. But every chance I got, I wanted to be alone, and look for crawdads and salamanders, and grew up to do the same, and run into the same creeks and looking for Bigfoot.
Yeah.
The world's full of all sorts of mystery and wonder.
I think it's interesting on one of the first questions I ask almost every guest is what was the magnetic pull that brought you to the interest in the mystery, right? And some people, it started when they're really young. Some people didn't start till they were older, and everybody's got a different idea or a different story of that origin of what brought them here. And I've always felt like I'm intrigued when I meet somebody like you who says, you probably grew up like most kids. You see the PG film, you see, but it is an interest that at some point you developed, and then you started researching it and educating yourself and applying things in the field, and just kept getting deeper and deeper. In my situation, where without really having an interest in it or knowing anything about it, I had an encounter at 18 years old, and it was like I didn't get to see the math equation. I use that analogy because I got boys that are 17, 18 years old. I see advanced calculus or advanced algebra. The problem is like a paragraph long, and they're trying to come up with the answer. I felt like having an encounter like I did at 18. Somebody showed me the answer and said, okay, now show me what the problem is.
Yeah.
Because it's like I was trying to read something right to left instead of left to right, But it is fascinating how your interest started out, with the whole Boundary Waters origin, and then you kind of started diving into the community and learning. I'm kind of curious about that, because that's been a topic on some different friends of mine who have YouTube channels, on people who are on their journey, whether they started satisfying an interest in this topic a week ago or a decade ago or 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah,
they're all in a different place in their journey. And for somebody who's just starting from the starting line right now, you go and see all these shows that are out there with titles that are built around the shock value of it, and the common sense filter that you have to apply seems like 80 to 90% of the content that's out there just is like, don't use that as a resource, right? And I'm not taking shots at other channels when I say that. I'm just, when I've heard Brent and Leon and Joe and these people that I share a lot in common with in how we approach the subject and view the subject from a realistic scientific approach, I think that there are a lot of people out there who speak factually about things that aren't fact, and they pour Pat's Bigfoot sauce on everything, then just you gobble it up. Joe was saying that on his channel tonight.
I'll tell you, I've gone through all those phases: that initial enthusiasm, the deep dive, the pareidolia. I've done all of that, and through it all, I've realized God has a sense of humor, no doubt about it. and I don't believe he delivers anything you can't handle. I've never lost control of my bowels or
yet
my bladder
yet.
We're
getting older, James. We're getting older.
Yes. Well, my prostate helps with the retention. But like that's the encounter that I had when I first heard Chichichuha coming from the river. I felt like this big. It was like, oh my God, this is happening. This is crazy. It's going on. It wasn't pleasant. I actually thought, of course, anybody would. These are your last moments on the planet. I felt this big boom. I felt the sonic percussion of this boom. It sounded like an empty dumpster being dropped onto concrete from a few feet above the ground. It was just massive, and the sounds, the vocalizations, and the discomfort it produced in those moments. It was otherworldly, and I'm grateful that the recorder picked up what it did. I'm grateful actually that very unwittingly my tarp was sort of situated so that it amplified what sounds were in the woods toward the recorder microphones. I think that was sort of a happy coincidence that enabled me, that opened my ears through audio analysis of the reality of these. That I was not in the midst of one or two subjects. There were multiple subjects out there, and some sound, like I said earlier, some sound like gremlins, some sound like devils. There's one that says, "Are you wreaking havoc?" Later, it says, "Havoc, hate this man tomorrow," and that's fucking terrifying when you listen to it, and you're a virgin to this. It is, pardon my language. It I mean, I was messed up for a good month, Jeff, and I came home to a home where I can't speak to my wife about it. She hates the subject. I was going to the woods anyway. She tolerated that, but with this new enthusiasm, it brings her tolerance up to a new level. And we've gotten past that, thank God. But for a month, I was a basket case. Then I decided to listen to the audio, and and I was messed up. Just at the time when I thought I was doing okay, I was messed up for another few months. It affected me personally, interpersonally, professionally. It was a real ride. But my best therapy was to stick to it and learn as much as I could about the phenomenon, analyze that audio, listen to it. I've listened to it 1,000 times. At the 3-minute 30 mark of that audio, that 10-minute audio, you hear one of them saying, "Ebenopsy, ooh ha ha." I mean, a really deep voice, "Ebenopsy, ooh ha ha." But you can make all this shit out. Pardon my language. I'm toward the end of my beer, clearly. I apologize.
But you've got, like you say, you've got these recordings on the website, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be talking with you now if I didn't have the recordings. People. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. People ask me, "What's new? What's new? How you doing?" And I can't. I am an open book sometimes, and that's much to my family's chagrin. But there's so much new out there. I'm formerly atheist. I realize I've done the rabbit hole on the whole God thing and the Bible thing. And my current thinking about the reality of this phenomenon is that there are still races of giants out in the wilderness living on the outskirts of our society. The Bible speaks of it. I have a very tangential mindset, and my current thinking is that these are the very giants that the Bible spoke of, long before the New Testament.
Yeah.
It's a trip. I'm telling you.
I mean, people ask me. I mean, I think I'd like to ask my guests, what do you think it is? When it comes to origins, and I think you've kind of summed that up there. What your thoughts are? I don't know that I believe it's flesh and blood. I jokingly say, until I see a Bigfoot fart out an orb, I don't think they're related. But I do believe they're flesh and blood. I'm not saying that they don't have a supernatural capability, but I do believe that we as humans simply underestimate how good they are at something that is physical and real. I mean, the ability to move from A to B is something that people say, I didn't even hear it when it moved there. And part of my own encounter involves a moment like that. How did it get from A to B? I turn around, there it is. When I heard it over there, how did that happen? I could hear you snap a finger from 50 yards away that day. There was no ambient sound around me and no wind. But in retrospect, I just have to think, if you lived in the woods 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for decades, and your main goal was to be elusive and unseen, that you would probably just get that good at it. I think there's a physical explanation to that. But like I say, I don't have in my research anything that I can prove that they don't have the ability to do something that may be harder to wrap your head around. So I'll entertain those types of conversations, but for the most part, I think we're chasing something's flesh and blood. As far as the origins go, I really subscribe to the idea that, for 10,000 years, there was cave drawings and marks of this throughout literature, folklore, everything, and this was global. This was before mass communication.
Sure.
I find it hard to wrap my head around that in some nomadic tribe somewhere 10,000 years ago, somebody got hammered around the campfire, made up a story, and somehow it spread globally to where it was the same thing was drawn over and over and talked about and described and told about. It just, to me, there has to be a record of it physically being there to some degree. Now, how that, if we're looking at something that is devolving or, versus something like, I have to be careful on how I explain this because I don't want this. I've heard it explained a lot of times, people's different interpretations, but when we look at something that's capable of getting out of its niche, so to speak, evolving out of its niche, I think that we could be looking at, like Doug's explanation, we could be looking at that lake that has 6-foot long lake trout in it when every other lake has 50-inch lake trout. You know what I mean? Like, what happened there? There was a perfect storm of some genetic mutation that took over, and it evolved into that known specimen being able to achieve something that seems unlikely in all those other lakes. And we have that represented all over. So are we looking at a creature that is evolving into something that's getting out of its niche? Or are we looking at something that was abandoned in niches all over and basically went extinct except for representations of it still left here? And I don't know that I subscribe wholeheartedly to the whole. I actually have a lot of problems with the kind of that Nephilim concept. I mean, a lot of those depictions were creatures that were described in many cases as being way taller than anything we're talking about, way bigger than anything we're talking about. But it's interesting to find out people's takes on it,
Yeah, and my current thinking is simply tangential with my study of the Bible. I've been studying it since 2008. I was going through a divorce, and pastor brought me in, and it tickles me intellectually, and there's a lot to learn there. I love wisdom. I love the stories of the Bible and the lessons to be gotten from it. And I tell you, if anybody's interested, don't start with the Old Testament because that'll turn you off too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just brutal.
Sure.
Wicked. I mean, we are a wicked sort. We are the ones that go to war. And I look at these, what I've come to the conclusion, they're a people, a giant people. I think they may even be, and this is, I'm not saying that they are, but I'm considering, simply MichiganAboriginal.com. The website. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. You did
without project.
Thank you.
So it's MichiganAboriginal.com. Skip the project there.
Yeah, there you go. On YouTube, it is Michigan Aboriginal Project. But there's a giant, there's a race of people referred to in the Bible called the Zamzummim, and in Deuteronomy 2nd chapter, verse 20. And the origin of the Zamzummim people, they got their name from the ancient Hebrew word zimzum, which has a meaning of to buzz or to hum. Now, in a lot of the audio recordings that I've gotten, there is a buzzing or humming. And I mentioned earlier my harmonic resonance sort of theory about this vocal modality. And I'm just wondering, I'm not saying they are, but could it be that these are the Zamzummim people, those that buzz and hum? I don't know. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
it's an interesting take. I mean, I had the whole buzzing and humming part of that is interesting. I haven't heard anybody
well, I've
relate that,
experienced during my encounter that which I did hear and experience. There was a point where their vocals or whatever they're projecting caused this raspy static on my eardrums. It's very acute and very uncomfortable. I can't say it really hurt, but I mean, I was really quite taken by it, and I think it's what a lot of people refer to as getting zapped, because I felt and heard it on my tympanic membranes. It was very ephemeral. It didn't last long, but that happened during the the crux of the highlights of my encounter.
yeah.
And I mentioned it later on, during my narrative. You hear me in the background in those 10 minutes that I published, just kind of mouthing off and mumbling as I do.
Well, so what do you got planned on the horizon here? Is there
My
anything
next
we
trip,
should?
I forever I've been going up to northern Michigan to a favorite valley I've been going to as a kid. It's got a beautiful river. There are lakes nearby. I love to fish for little brook trout. I like to go in late October, although I'm not fishing for brook trout. The river's closed at that point. I took my eyes out the river and look to the hills now. I go up late fall and early spring because there are no bugs and no people, save for those that visit you occasionally on the
Sure.
on the campsite. So that's my next trip. Occasionally I'll drive an hour. I might go to Southfield or Ann Arbor and drop a recorder here or there. But it's just inviting more work for myself. I've got enough going on in my life, enough madness that I got to keep the Sasquatch in its place. That my interest there. But I'm obsessed with learning more about the vocals, and I never ever thought I'd get anything to the extent that I have, especially in my most recent recordings, the female voices out from Ann Arbor, and they're the most recent publications on Michigan Aboriginal Project on YouTube. So look at it, study my journey, and if you don't have to go very far to have an experience, and you might not ever see one. But you can, if you do what I've done, go look for these structures and look for their uniqueness. You can tell if people made them or if they haven't. There were details in this structure that I shared with the audience earlier that at the tail end of it, where I hid the recorder, that were just, beyond the pale. I know that these ancient creations have created them. So the more often I do that, the luckier I get.
Well, I look forward to following along. Now, if you are to capture further audio captures or video captures, you'll continue to keep updating the website and probably sharing them on your
The
YouTube
website's
too.
basically, my central hub. I'm attempting to monetize my efforts. All my time and treasure, it's all come from my own. And I haven't worked it for over a year now. I'm doing some odd jobs here and there. So I'd be grateful if somebody bought a T-shirt from the shop off the MichiganAboriginal.com, or I'm equally grateful for a comment. Anybody on YouTube, just let me know you're out there, because I do this basically for myself, but I do have, through the journey, I have some. I'd like to be able to help in some way. I'm someone with a history of depression, and I know that kids these days, especially young men, are increasingly depressed, and I think they're leading the pack in suicides. They're in their basements, they're in their parents' homes, they're on their game consoles, and I think that's no way to live. There is great adventure out there. I am formerly atheist. I've come around and done a 180 on that. I never knew if Sasquatch existed or not, but when I found out by my own wits and reckoning that they do in fact exist, and they're in the very valley that I was fishing in anyway, fishing and camping in, I'm going to go look for it because I want to go see them. I wish to inspire young men to get out of their basements, out into the woods, and just realize that there's something greater out there. You don't have to have the same Jesus journey as I had.
No.
But
That
there's so
idea
much.
of just finding a passion,
Yeah,
whether it is fishing or camping or an interest in, you know, discovering and trying to get the truth in this mystery. Um,
test your metal. God wants us to be happy while we're here. This is my personal opinion. And and we're meant to be young men. My last name's Lady. My mom's name, I haven't shared this with you yet, Jeff, but my mom's name is Gay. So I was the only son of Gay Lady with 3 sisters, right? So it's no wonder I'm running down to the creek every day. And I still do it today. It's in my blood. I just long for the woods and to walk barefooted in tall dewy grass and just to test my mettle as a man.
sure.
And it's just it's great to reconnect with the earth and to appreciate this wonderful creation that we're blessed to enjoy while we're in this physical plane.
Yeah.
And I think all young men could be rejuvenated in today's otherwise insane, increasingly feminized society. And I don't mean that as a misogynistic comment whatsoever, but all
No.
societies go through a phase. We're in the autumn and even perhaps the winter of our years, and I think young men need to be men and young girls need to be girls and celebrate the differences between us and have a mutual respect that pleases all creation in the end.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you, sharing your faith as well as, your outlook and your passion in that regards. I understand that we all have different beliefs. Yours don't differ very much from mine, but I certainly am not blind to the fact that not everybody in chat is probably of the same political spectrum I am or of the same,
Right.
belief system and things like that. And I think that's what makes the world an interesting place. And I think that one of the things we've started talking about in the last few episodes is when it comes to this community, especially, we're all students and we are all professors. We learn from each other, we teach each other, and we don't have to be the same to be able to learn something. I don't even have to like somebody that much to be able to learn something from them.
Yeah.
We all look at, that's common in this community. People talk about different shows, different channels on YouTube. I don't like that guy because of this or because of that.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I can't learn something from
Yeah,
him.
I
So,
grew up around my stepfather was a professor, a lawyer, a dean, and he liked to poke the bear a little bit. And I come from a family and with my sisters and my steps as well. There are 4 step kids. We were all encouraged to voice our opinions around the dinner table, and we all did. And it was both sides of the spectrum. It was very healthy, very good, and we never. Some people would get, their panties in a bunch, but that was rare. We all walked away family and connected and stronger,
Mr. Lee says John Wayne's real name was Marion. He had balls of steel too. Yeah, a name is just relative. So
I love that.
That's very well. I tell you, I appreciate you taking the time and joining us tonight. It was really fun talking to you.
Well, thanks for the
love to have you on again in the future.
Sure,
well,
anytime.
Hopefully you're not too far away from us, really.
No, not at all. Just over Bemidji. I saw that's part of your history. My sister-in-law. My wife is from Minnesota, Richfield, Minnesota, and my sister-in-law. No. It was her friends. One of her friends went to Bemidji State. Is that right?
Yeah, she was a Beaver.
Okay.
the BSU that's Beavers, awesome. Bemidji State University Beavers.
Yeah.
They're not known. I mean, it's a cool campus. It is on Lake Bemidji, so the dorms and everything are like right overlook and are on a really nice lake out in the woods. I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah, Minnesota's such a beautiful place.
It is kind of off the grid a little bit. They have a very competitive Division I hockey team. Usually Bemidji State is one of the top 20 hockey teams, college Division I hockey teams. But that, other than that, the college isn't, you aren't going to see them winning a football championship or anything. But
It's okay.
they have some big programs for wildlife management, different degree. Every university kind of is known for a certain sector of what degrees or what do people really go there for. Bemidji State is one of those that is pretty popular with wildlife management, wildlife law enforcement, things like that.
Well, how can we get the academic community to seriously embrace this subject? Because we have thousands of citizen scientists, if you will, out there, doing stuff like you and I are doing. And Doug's got great stuff, and he's got a hair that I want to talk to him about, because it looks like the terminal end of the hair looks as if it's the terminal end of a tentacle for a squid or an octopus. It's like an extension of our largest organ, right? Our skin's the largest organ. The hair, I think on the Sasquatch may have purpose, and it may, it's like when we get the hairs raising on our skin. It's kind of a warning system.
That's something I've talked about a lot in past episodes about, and it stems from conversations I've had with Doug about, you hear depictions down south, extreme southern geography, where, they're fairly short-haired, and even some of the hair samples that we see are coarse hair. Seems to be fairly coarse compared to the ones we see in the extreme northern climates. I'm not talking about all that's in the middle, the Oklahoma and all that. I'm talking about the green swamp of Florida, 120 degrees most days in the summer, versus Manitoba, where it's, 20 below zero for 4 months of the year. You would need longer hair that is more limp, that lays closer to the skin, more follicles per square inch for an insulating factor. Down in those hot climates, you'd need a shorter hair that's coarser, that stands up off of the skin easier, less follicles per square inch for a ventilating factor. So insulation versus ventilation, dealing with two separate climates. Now, everything in between, you might see variations of both. But it would explain why one up north maybe has 8-10 inch hair draping off of its arms and things, because that hair is so thick and matted. And maybe down south, like the drawings that Larry Batson does of different descriptions that people share, I don't know how many southern ones have fairly short hair, it seems like. And yet the ones up north seem to be draping down more. That's not a rule of thumb, but there is a trend in that's noticeable. And so I think you're right. I think that the hair is an important descriptive for sure when people talk about what they've seen. But what's in the description as to why? Is there a reason why hair is longer or shorter or coarser or whatever? I think there are reasons, but
there must be. It's all biology, and it's beyond my ability to understand. I have found a clump of very fine hair, and I don't know if it's hair. As a matter of fact, I think I may have misplaced, but I think it's somewhere in my car. But I wonder if they have an undergrowth of hair during the colder months.
Certainly on northern specimens, you see that in other big game animals,
because we, as humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, we don't have that ability. This species, and I do believe they're a species of human. It's like I sometimes refer to them as humanimalians, part human, animal, and alien. Who knows? Kind of satisfies all opinions out there with regard to their origins. But they have abilities, physical abilities, biological qualities, and characteristics that are far beyond ours. And does that suggest that they are more advanced physiologically, biologically. I think it kind of does, and it kind of upsets the theory of evolution.
Yeah, I think that there are. Again, it comes into, are we looking at something that is, devolving or evolving? And I know that sounds weird, but I mean, for instance, I think probably humans used to see in a UV vision spectrum. I think it's something that we, just evolved away from. And yet there are other species that are in the process of evolving into adaptations of the climate and the geography that they exist in. These processes usually take generations upon generations to establish. And so when we're looking at over the last 50 years, what have we seen? We're just seeing this tiny little snapshot of that process, so it's really hard to, nobody's going to say, man, there was more descriptions 30 years ago of thicker, longer hair than there are now. It doesn't evolve that quickly,
Right.
But yeah, no, I think there's definitely something to that. Well, I appreciate you being on, James. We're going to have you on again at some point.
Yeah.
I think there might be a couple other shows on our network that might be contacting me saying, hey, is he interested in coming on our show at some point in the future? So
I'd be happy to. I've got the utmost respect for Doug's work, your work. I love your affect. It's so easy to talk to, Jeff. And it's smart. It's pithy conversation, which appeals to me as well. So I'm happy.
I don't claim to have many answers to anything, but
we're seekers,
one thing I try not to do is, speak factually about things that I don't know to be fact, or that I don't have enough evidence to show that I feel that it's a fact. There's a lot of theories that I've developed over time that I hear other people's theories, and they may affect how I look at a theory that I hold. And those theories are ever changing as I find evidence to support them or evidence to work against them. And I like conversations where we talk about that stuff. I think that learning to speak that language and being open to being open to create the dialogue to have those conversations is the one thing that moves this ball forward. I mean, the fact, like for you might capture the next audio recording, and guess what? You don't sit on it. You're going to put it on your website. You're going to share it. People are going to say, well, explain this, explain that. You're saying, look, I'm just sharing with you what I have. If everybody was willing to do that and approach it with an open mind and have real conversations, we might be a lot further down the road than we are right now. But we are in a community that has lost the ability to see the 90% that we have in common. And instead we take the 10% that we differ on and we poison each other with it. And it is not working.
No, it's sad. Quite honestly.
Yeah.
What do you do? Just carry on. It's the one thing that drives me to go back into the woods.
Yep. Absolutely. And you know what? And if you don't have a passion like that, then I have a heart for people who are lost from finding a passion. And like you say, I mean, there's a lot of young men out there who, might be products of, a single family household or a single parent household. And, that mom's struggling to figure out, how do I connect with my son? Driving him to soccer practice or driving him to whatever. You're just a ride there, right? You're going to sit there and watch him in soccer practice. The outdoors is something that you do together. You don't sit there and watch one parent do something, or a parent doesn't sit there and just watch their kid take part in it. You do it together. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to camping, fishing, all these things hiking, all these things are in the outdoors. I'm a big advocate for that, to building bridges to get these young people out of their house, out of the basement, off of the PlayStations. And I think you are spot on when it comes to that.
It's the best medicine.
Yeah.
And having gone down the road, I don't want to see young kids live in the dark valley. I've been there, done that.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, you have a good night, James. Appreciate you
brother.
being on. I'll talk to you a
You're
little bit
grateful.
and chat when we're done. And
All right.
I'm going to say goodbye to these fine folks, and I
All right.
appreciate
Peace
you
be with
taking the
you,
time to
people.
be here.
Thank you, brother.
You bet. Thank you. Well, I think that was a good show. I really enjoyed talking to James. I loved listening to his audio recordings. I'm going to spend some time on his website looking at it closer. I would encourage all of you to do that. MichiganAboriginal.com. Check it out. Let's see. What else do we have here? Next week's show will be at the same time next week. We were entertaining the idea of moving it back an hour, but I don't know. Maybe we'll discuss that a little bit next week, get some feedback from you guys on it. I'm pretty comfortable with the time slot it's in. Would really appreciate if it's your first time here, if you're listening on podcast, which a lot of people do now. The show's being put out on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Spotify, iTunes podcast. It's on every podcast platform. And if you are listening to it on podcast, at some point when you're on YouTube next, find us here, Pine Island Research, and subscribe to the Untold Radio Network. And you can subscribe to the channel. And if you happen to run into one of these videos like you guys are watching right now, go into the comments. Tell me what podcast platform you're watching on. If you're watching on one, it's helpful to us to figure out which one is getting some traffic. Also, if you've got an opinion on the show, anything we talked about, you're welcome to go in the comments and post your thoughts there. I appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. You can find me on Pine Island Research on YouTube, or on Facebook, I should say. And I look forward to next week's show, seeing you guys again. And we'll play the outro.